and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you. You're watching another episode of Encounter. In this episode, we have Dr. Prakash Joshi, who is a special guest who was invited for the President's Fund for Creative Writing under the aegis of the Ministry of Arts and Culture. Dr. Joshi, thank you very much and a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Roshan.
Dr. Joshi, you're also a teacher at the Department of English and Other Languages at the University of Dr. Hari Singh Gaur in a central university in Madhya Pradesh.
Yes.
Dr. Joshi has done an undergrad, a bachelor's in English, a master's in English, and also a PhD in English.
Yes.
And you also have a PhD in English and drama.
Yes, I worked on Tennessee Williams. When I was doing my master's, I started reading some short fiction of Tennessee Williams, who has the reputation of being one of the three major dramatists of the US of the 20th century. I was drawn to Tennessee Williams by his short stories, in fact. And then when I started exploring more, then I read more of his short stories. From there, I moved on to his one-act plays, shorter plays, and from there to his full-length plays. So my work, in fact, my doctoral work, is in a way a covering of, a tracing of this progression of Tennessee Williams, the author, from his short stories to his full-length drama. That is how what I have tried to cover in my thesis.
So you've written a lot over many years, right?
Yes, in terms of research articles published in academic journals and a book and some poems and short stories that I wrote as a child long ago when I was a school kid in the regional papers. I used to write in perhaps around 20, 21 stories as a school kid.
How young is young?
Well, that is a very relative and a tough question, but I was a school kid, so I would say I was in the age bracket of 7, 8 to 11, 12.
So that started very young for you.
Yes, that is when I wrote, but then things changed afterwards. The educational system, the expectations of parents and family, they were different.
What was your drive back then for writing those short stories?
That's an interesting question, Roshan. And this is what I was talking to the students at the Department of Creative Writing at MGI a while ago. I would observe, I would look around. I was not a kid who was very much liked by my classmates and schoolmates for games and sports. I wasn't very fit for those games. So on the sidelines, I had nothing else to do except watch. Watch and see myself in relation to all those things happening around. Probably it began there. And then at home also. Things started changing as I grew up. My parents wanted me to become either an engineer or a doctor.
Yes.
And an honest confession, I could become neither. And so I was going through my senior school days and early graduation days. I had this feeling of being a failure, a bitter failure in life, because I couldn't do what is considered to be successful in India. It still is the case.
A rat race.
Yes, you would know about India. There are hubs like Kota or Jaipur.
Of course.
Well, thousands of students from all over India, they are crammed into those coaching institutes, and they are made to, well, grow like robots. Well, I was a failure that way. But then once I started teaching, became a teacher at college level, I still had that feeling. But now I bless my Maker for giving me what He's given me. Now I love this occupation of teaching. And I have recreated the writer in me slowly and steadily. I've gone back to poetry writing. I've started slowly publishing them again. Short stories, they're coming up. We will very soon see them in print also.
Can we have some insight?
No, not yet,
Not
because
yet.
titles I still might
All right,
change
okay.
at the final stage.
Can we know what is it about?
It's about a number of things. The way I have experienced life, I have received my impressions with my students. I'm a traveler, love traveling, and though people in my family don't like it, but then truth is the truth. I love to travel alone.
That's
so whenever
part
I
of
get
who you are as an observer.
as an observer, yes.
But one thing, being an observer is one thing, but the ability to write what you observe is a totally different thing.
Yes, it is, Roshan. Absolutely. But then that observation becomes internalized.
But it's very personal.
It's very personal. It's very subjective. But at the same time, the expression of that, the presentation of that observation has to be authentic.
I've learned that the ability to write is a therapy. Like you download your thoughts, which is very important, considered as a therapy, so that you can put in new thoughts. And that process develops your critical thinking.
Yes, it does.
And we mentioned earlier that we don't really see the younger generation thinking critically.
In this world, it's a beautiful island, Mauritius, far from the business pressures of Europe and an overcrowded 1.3 billion people of
Yes.
India and the burgeoning South Asia. So we don't feel the pressure here, but the pressure to be a leading business power, the pressure to be a leading military power, all those pressures which are working well in many parts of the world, they're not working here. The point that I'm coming to is that in that world, which is so much governed by business world, critical thinking becomes a kind of analytical way of thinking, judgmental. You put labels, acceptable, not acceptable, legitimate, illegitimate, though in business terms, of course, not in traditional terms. Creative thinking is generative kind of thinking. It helps the reader and the writer both to generate. You were talking about therapy. The interesting thing about creative thinking, which ultimately leads to creative writing too, creative writing is nothing if it is not creative expression.
Of course.
It's first and foremost the therapy for the writer, because all those complexes,
He's exteriorating all
yes,
this. Yes.
exteriorating them, complexes, living in surroundings and circumstances. This might be work atmosphere, family atmosphere, social atmosphere, economic circumstances, or whatever. All those complexes, and personal too. There are personal conflicts too. I sometimes feel that many of us, I for sure am a split personality. Not in the medical terms, but I know that there is in a part of me. One has to negotiate, deal with those complexes and all those pressures. So they, as you said, your beautiful word, exteriorize all of that. And probably Aristotle too was talking about catharsis, but then Aristotle was concerned more about the readers, the audience who would read or a work of art, would go to drama theatre and watch a performance and feel that cathartic pleasure, their own complexes and emotions, troubled emotions, getting healed or reformed. Well, that was Aristotelian view, but I'm coming, when I said this first and foremost, it's a therapy for the author. I was thinking of what David Morley said. There's a beautiful Cambridge introduction to creative writing, and in the introductory part of the book, he talks about this therapy that creative writing is for the writer, and that comes out that all that all that is buried inside comes out in the written form, and naturally, once you have thrown it out of your system, though on sheets of paper or computer screen, well, you are healed. I might have sounded very abstract, but then let me give you a concrete example. I said I worked on Tennessee Williams. So while I was working on his plays and his short stories, working towards my thesis, I read two biographies of Tennessee Williams, his memoir also. One of the biographers mentions that while he was living in a rooming house, other men also living there, boisterous men early in the morning, taking their bath, making all kind of noises. Here was this one man, Tennessee Williams, every morning, passionately, frenetically, compulsively typing away on his typewriter. He needed all those complexes that he had in him, well, exteriorized, put on paper. And if you look at his life, Tennessee Williams's life, his relationship with his sister Rose underwent a lobotomy. She had developed some mental disorder. That is what the doctors said, and they operated upon her, and then thereafter she could never recover. She went into a kind of, I wouldn't say coma, but then she became a robotic kind of person. And Tennessee Williams was so attached to his sister that he couldn't bear this pain. What I'm trying to say here is that if Tennessee Williams had not treated himself, exteriorized himself, all those pressures, perhaps he would have gone the way his sister went. That
he might have, anything could have happened from
could
there.
have happened. Like his sister could become incurable, he too could have gone that way. So this is just one quick example that comes to my mind. The second part of the therapy you're talking about is absolutely for the reader. When a reader starts reading, when the reader begins to see some affinity there, I was telling about myself, some problems. One of his stories caught my attention. And would you believe what this story was? This short story that leads to his play called The Glass Menagerie, the famous Glass Menagerie. And in that play, and it has been made into a beautiful film also, there are these two characters, Laura, the sister, and Tom, the brother. In a way, it's very autobiographical for the writer. So when I was reading that play and reading that story, I felt probably Tom in the story, Tom in the play was 60% of me, wanting to be distant, travel, unknown.
So you could relate a lot to what was. I could relate a lot. Yes.
And that was a turning point in my life.
Does this give you a sense of liberation
that
you're able to relate to the book?
You have
this is a psychological effect.
Yes, that's what I was coming to. And you have precisely put this in briefest possible words. I immediately related to that story. It became a turning point for me. It became a reformation for me. So, what you said about therapy, this is how it becomes a therapy for the reader too. And then, it's not only about a piece of writing. It could be something that you look at. It could be a short film too.
It could be a music, it could be a video, anything.
No words. just a piece of music floating somewhere and the air comes to you and all of a sudden you are stunned, probably your eyes are moist.
Why is creative writing so important in your own words?
I'll give two answers to this. Not two, in fact, it's just one single answer, but then broken into two parts. When writers write, sometimes they problematize. They write to create controversies. But those controversies they create not because they want to create controversies. That is their response to certain circumstances.
It's a way to address to a specific problem
or a
or
situation
issue. Yeah.
or an issue. It might be a political issue or a social issue or any other kind of issue. For example, I couldn't do it. I couldn't read out the story at the workshop the other day where I was lecturing. I was reading a story of Premchand. Of course, the story is in Hindi. The political circumstances in India today, and this is 2018, for the past 70 years, but Premchand wrote this story, Saput, many decades ago. So in that story, he talks about a woman who does a penance, a kind of tapasya, for many years, and when the goddess appears to her, well, happy, ready to grant boon. Sorry, the title of the story is a Vardhan, boon, the
Yes.
boon. So she asks this woman, what do you want? Money, a good son, a good house, etc., etc., so many things. And ultimately she says, I want somebody, someone, a boy, who will do good for this place, for this country, for the world. So, one might think, now, but then Premchand wrote this story many decades ago. He was addressing a certain situation, perhaps, and was. So yes, that way it might become controversial. You have this entire history of creative writing, 19th century, all these turbulent movements, modernist movements, post-French Revolution, the kind of writings that happened afterwards all over Europe, they can be called controversial one way or another. When a writer responds to whatever set of circumstances, and he should and he ought to, I as a reader, you as a reader, will look at that situation, that issue from that point of view, from the writer's point of view. Either I would, as a reader, like to make amendments in what the writer has suggested or in the way he has responded, or I would like to, disagree with him, and in this way, the discourse, the communication in the society grows, and communication, this discourse, this debate is necessary for the development of any community or society.
Which is lacking in the younger generations
Younger generation,
now.
yes, of
A
course.
lot, because they are not being able to take decisions on their own. Everything is a machine or an app making the decision or providing an action for them. They don't even have to think about it. So do you think that humanity is losing out a lot on these technological advances at the expense of creative writing?
Yes, to a great extent. But Roshan, after having lived these years and seen and experienced what I tend to be an optimist. And I do believe that it's a phase. How do I tell this? When I was reading about creative writing, how to do creative writing, well, when I do my creative writing, I choose to write on a sheet of paper. But when I do my academic writing, I go straight to my computer and start typing. I was reading a book on creative writing, very recent book published about 10 years ago. Of course, to teach students. It says, work on your PC. So things have changed, of course.
Yes.
this world that we are living in has lost its third dimension. I mean, the depth is left, has gone away, in a sense that we are, here in Mauritius, I don't see it happening as much as it's happening elsewhere. We are bombarded with too much of media, too much of information. Our textbooks, the way we read and respond to even creative texts, even that has changed. I feel saddened that often students, instead of going to the original expression, narration, experience of the author, would like to read about that third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand through some guide on internet or elsewhere. They are losing out on that. If we could in some way could devise some mechanism by which students and young generation, wise students, anybody, wherever, anywhere, could go back to whatever he or she can read. Could be a small poem, a very short story, and then, well, imbibe, recreate himself, herself through that expression.
It's a self-re-education, which is very
Indeed,
important nowadays.
indeed,
Yes,
indeed,
definitely.
Indeed.
All right, we have almost come to the end of this episode of Encounter, but I want to end with a series of questions. It's a quick fire question,
Okay.
just to know you better.
Oh.
Are you more Hollywood or Bollywood?
Honestly, I'm neither.
Tea, coffee,
Coffee,
night or day?
night.
Night it is. What kind of music do you like?
Folk music.
Folk music. Western, Asian?
Folk music from anywhere in the world. Africa, India, Asia, wherever. Oh, folk American too, folk European too. There are many Bollywood movies, you know, if you're talking about, the Bollywood that I like is the Bollywood of 1950s and 1960s. Whenever they composed their music, they would take some tunes from the folk music of, say, some parts of USSR, Azerbaijan,
That would be their
Afghanistan.
creativity.
They would put them. Yes, that is that beautiful creativity, recreation. So that moves me, moved me and moves me.
Who are your inspirations?
In what terms?
In terms of who has inspired you in your life, or in terms of writing?
Tennessee Williams.
Your favorite book or books?
Well, it's very difficult.
Try to pick up a few.
Okay. The Glass Menagerie, which I mentioned, is one. It was a turning point in my life. There are many, but then I would use this only because it gave me a kind of restart in my life when I was a master's student.
All right. And
of course, the short stories of Tennessee Williams. All of them, 50-odd short stories.
do you have any favorite movies?
Mughal-e-Azam is one in Hindi. Madhumati is another, for another reason. It's a Bollywood movie again.
You travel a lot. What's your favorite country you've traveled to?
Okay, travelled, well, Mauritius.
Oh, thank you.
Very honestly, because I've travelled to the US, parts of the Eastern Europe, Connecticut, Eastern US, New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, even going up to DC, but then this is a beautiful place.
Oh, thank you for the massive compliment.
This is the truth, Roshan. I mean, this is what I feel. I've been here for almost a week now.
Yes.
And I feel that this is a wonderful place.
Well, Mark Twain was probably right. Well, on this positive note, thank you very much, Dr. Joshi, for being with us for this episode of Encounter. Ladies and gentlemen, before leaving you, we have the email address which is being displayed at the bottom of your screen. So please send us your suggestions or proposals for this program. We have now come to the end of Encounter. Thank you very much for being with us. I'll catch you again next week, same time, same channel.